who's essentially the, well, I'm not sure, essentially or technically, or neither actually, who is supposedly, right, di umano, the leader of the opposition, ito yung sinabi niya, I'm not considering running yet. Alright? Nung tinanong, I think this is Karen Davila kanina, tinanong siya, whether she'll run for the presidency in 2028. Sabi niya, I'm not considering running yet. The most important, I mean, read the whole thing, but the part that is important is yet. Right? But what I'm 100% considering is that the opposition will run candidates for president, vice president, and across the line. Yun yung tinatrabaho the last 2 years, and we'll continue work on it until next year sa midterms and the next 4 years until 2028. So I think this is extremely encouraging because A, na-recognize ni Risa na hindi ka pwede maging seryosong kandidato for the presidency if the election is in 2028 and then October 2027 ka palang magbigay ng indication na you cannot do that. And look at what she also said. 2 years ko na tinitrabaho yan, meaning 2022 pa, and then your game plan is all the way to 2028. So not only you don't only prepare in the October before the election year, right? You prepare for it for more than half a decade. Especially when you're starting from such a low base, considering almost pulverized yung opposition. 2019, 0. 8-0, right? Yun po yung nangyari. Kahit isa hindi nakapasok. That was the first time in 81 years, going all the way to the Commonwealth period, na kahit isa sa mga opposition ay hindi nakapasok sa isang nationally elected office. In this case, the Senate. Grabe, di ba? So that should have been already the wake-up call. So, Risa is essentially saying that hindi ka pwede magkaroon ng pag-asa na makabalik sa pwesto and to win over people and win back their hearts and minds kung umaasa ka lang sa mga last minute, fourth quarter, last 2 minutes kind of magic. It just doesn't work that way. You have to be professional about it and you will have to work on it. Number 3 rather. Number 3, ang sinasabi rin ni Risa dito is that the opposition should have its own slate. So it's not about uniteam. Hindi natin tinitingnan yung posibilidad na, I don't know, a good unit team. So if, kunyari, bad unit team in 2022, bad on many levels, including sustainability, hindi ito yung coalition politics per se. The opposition has to have a seat at the table. Or at least has to have candidates vying for the highest positions. Right? Kasi otherwise, walang siseryoso sa'yo. Otherwise, you're just gonna be a junior coalition partner to Trapos and bigger forces or populists among others. And then essentially you have to play the game of ano ka ba? With Marcoses ka ba? With Duterte's ka ba? Or whoever other new dynasty is gonna emerge. Some of them we have already discussed in these episodes, right? So ang sinasabi niya, we have to have an independent, autonomous force in our own right. And yun ang dapat ipupush natin sa 2028. Now, having said all of those things, obviously, this raises a number of questions. Unang-unang, when she said we have been working on this for the past 2 years, I'm not so sure. I didn't see much movement in 2022 to 2023. And it was only in the past, 8 months or so na medyo nakita natin na Risa was... Now, maybe there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. But if ako nga, or sige, yung mga katulad namin na trabaho namin essentially to cover politics every single day, kung hindi namin masyadong napansin yung groundwork, then maybe there was not as much groundwork. Again, you can say, Richard, you just don't know enough. But ang argument ko naman is if you're really doing something significant on a nationwide scale, dapat medyo, there would be at least some smoke, if not, seeing the fire itself, diba? So, I'm sure Risa has been doing something, but yun nga, ang thing kasi is, ang nakikita ng tao is yung mga ibang leaders ng opposition na essentially nag-world traveler, or yung iba bumalik sa civil society, or both, among other things. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm just wondering what you're saying in the last 2 years. Kasi yun nga yung concern ko eh. In the 6 to 12 months after 2022 elections, parang naglaho yung opposition. I'm not aware of any nationwide effort to mobilize again the pink movement. Sabi ko nga eh, isa sa mga dahilan, paradoxically, ito yung unintended consequence. The law of unintended consequence sometimes could be also positive, not always negative. One reason na nagbardagulan ng mga Dutertes and Marcoses is because wala sa kanilang dalawa ay threatened sa opposition. So, they were at each other's throats. So, the absence of an alternative actually made the two dynasties to essentially, to get at each other, right? Kasi, yun nga, wala pala tayong competition, wala palang opposition, edi tayo na, o sino sa atin, di ba? Ganun yung nangyari. But that's besides the point. Ang akin naman is, I think Risa is absolutely right in talking about the long game. I think she's absolutely right about the need for the opposition to have someone to run for the highest office and two in 2028. Pero the reality is that mahirap ang 2025 eh. And I think it's very, very important for the opposition to have expectation management strategy. Because if you look at the race, this is an extremely, extremely competitive race. Kung saan even the Amy Marcoses or Isko Morenos may not make it to Magic 12. At least based on the Okta and Pulse Asia surveys I've seen. Having said that though, in principle, okay din ako dun sa proposal ni Dino na the more the merrier, and also on a principled level, mas maganda na mas maraming tumakbo for the opposition just to give our voters more options and more importantly, to fight the good fight and to get the message to the voters directly. So in that context, for instance, pinag-usapan natin bakit si Laila De Lima ay dapat tumakbo. Even though if you look at the initial preliminary pre-election surveys, not very encouraging numbers, nevertheless, it's about doing something that is right for the sake of it. But having said that, there's a part of me also thinks that you never know, right? You never know. I mean, you never know. Medyo fickle talaga yung voters natin. And how many times we were surprised by people who topped the Senate race, whether it's Villanueva, whether it's Robin Hood Padilla, probably also Remulla in the past. So there's some sort of fluidity and unpredictability. And tama naman sinabi ng ibang senatorial candidates na kausap ko. Sabi nila, yung number 1 to 5, medyo malayo na yan. Pero essentially from 5 onwards, ang threshold is super low. I think you just need to clear around 25 to 30% preference rate. So actually, maybe up to 30 people are fighting over 6 or 7 out of the 12 slots. Right? Kasi yung number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, ang layo nila dun sa rest eh. So, ang mag-aaway dyan for number 6 to 12 ay actually not only 6 person or 10 persons. Potentially 12 to 30 people will be fighting over it. And then, again, as I said, if you look at the authoritative surveys, potentially 2 Tulfos could make it. Even Amy mahirapan, hindi pa dinagdag yung tatlong Duterte option, as crazy and improbable as it may sound, but for the sake of argument, sabihin natin. But interestingly, if you look at the Publicus Asia survey, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, lahat na paisip, Willie Ong number 1. So, Erwin Tulfo here is number 2. Willie Ong is number 1. Top 5 si Digong. Wala si Bato. Andon din si Tito Soto. Right? So, this is the only survey I've seen kung saan, aside from Erwin Tulfo and Tito Soto, itong dalawa kasi consistent sila top 5 sa lahat ng mga surveys eh. Pero yung tatlo, like, Willie Ong is I think between 6 to 8, 6 to 9, mga ganun yung positions na. Same with Lacson. Well, Digong is, sabagay, Digong is also top 5. But so, surprise yung kay Willie Ong, for instance, number 1 dito. But you never know, right? Maybe there's tremendous amount of unpredictability talaga sa Senate race. Kasi surveys have done very well in predicting the presidential and vice presidential rates. So for instance, if you look at the final surveys of Pulse Asia, almost consistently tama yung kinuha nila. In fact, even the percentage breakdown, they have done slightly better than SWS and among others, right? For instance, na-predict nila yung Binay vice presidency in 2010. Because remember, actually, Mar Rojas was at 40% throughout much of the race in 2010. So, surprise yung Binay victory. But Pulse Asia was able to predict that. But I don't know of any survey agents in the Philippines which got correct lahat ng mga Senate races. Parang lahat ng Senate races na cover ko, parang medyo mali yung mga nangyari. May mga nakalusot, may mga nag-top na hindi na-predict ng even yung mga last pre-election surveys. So, again, I mean, this is public, we can have a discussion about it, but there might be some degree of fluidity and some degree of good unpredictability there. Because if you look at the public survey, actually, pasok si Lenny at pasok din si Kiko Pangilinan. So, interesting, right? So, dito sa survey na yan, Willie Ong is number 1. Pero the preference rate is very low, 39% lang, which is significantly lower dun sa preference rates na makita mo sa Okta. Sa Okta nga, yung mga preferences, 50% plus yung mga top 2, top 3. Viliong 39%, Erwin Tulfo at only 33%, almost 20 points lower than the other surveys. Digong only at 32%, Soto at 29%, Bongo at 29%, Isko Moreno at 29%, Amy Marcos at 26%, Lenny Robredo at 25%. So they are all statistically tied. Essentially from number 4 onwards, parang 4-5 statistically on Pia Cayetano, tatak mo si Pia Gibo, nakapasok si Gibo dito. Unlike almost all other surveys I've seen na sobrang malayo siya, right? And then you have Kiko Pangilinan and Lenny both at 25%. So dito sa survey na yan, pasok na pasok si Lenny at saka Kiko, so may dalawang pasok. So it's interesting. Again, as I said, medyo malayo ito dun sa mga ibang surveys na nakita ko, but at least in these surveys, you see some level of fluidity, unpredictability, some movement in terms of numbers. So then again, as I said, hindi sobrang gandang record ng mga, even the best survey agencies like Pulse Asia when it comes to predicting the final lineup. Definitely in terms of predicting yung ordinal rankings, sino mauna, etc. So kaya nga ang dami natin nagkaroon ng mga surprises dyan. Alright? So, taking that level of positive unpredictability into equation, I think it makes sense for opposition to field 4 or 5 people. Nevertheless, as I said, Risa Ontiveros has to have expectation management because there is also a good chance na none of them will make it to top 12 if we were to look at the dynamics in other kind of surveys. And in that sense, that's going to create some problem for 2028 because clearly, if may isa or dalawang opposition na makapasok in this election cycle, considering how difficult it is, and then if Risa Ontiveros sustains yung kanyang presence in the media, ups her media management and communications game, I think there's still a lot of room for improvement there. If Risa remains in the headlines and at the same time makes the most out of media scrutiny and media coverage, meaning delivering on her job as she has been doing from one hearing to the other, if she can sustain that momentum, then maybe she could really be the standard bearer of the opposition for 2028, regardless of how strong she is in the service. I mean, last time I checked, Lenny was 3 to 5% before she filed her candidacy certificate of candidacy for the presidency. So we have a precedence whereby an opposition leader, even at around 3 to 5% preference rating, went for it, and immediately that bumped up. And in the end, she went down with almost a quarter of the votes, right, based on official tally. So you went from around 3-4% to almost 20-25%, right? That's a huge jump. So should Risa be able to accomplish yung mga basics na minention ko, even if she were to be number 4, 5, or 6 with around 3, 4, 5, or 8% dun sa surveys, then she can still make the case na if ako yung standard bearer, eventually the pinks and the yellows and the reds or I don't know, blues and all of these different people who want a much more intelligent and acceptable and non-corrupt, alam mo na, all the negative things we associate with our leaders, then there's a chance that they could rally behind me. And then she'll have around 5 to 6 months to convince people to come to her side. And I don't think she's someone who will have any problem with debates or any kind of interaction that will show that she's caught above the rest, right? Based on sino maging kalaban niya? Baste? Sara? Di ba? But if she doesn't do those things, and then Lenny becomes the mayor of Naga, and then Lenny does well as mayor of Naga, which is extremely likely, I see this as a much more probable scenario, I won't be surprised that the push will be for Lenny to run again for the presidency in 2028. Then that's going to be, again, totally different kind of conversation. It is also very possible that Lenny will still do well enough but not consider the presidency in 2028 kasi maging first term pa lang niya sa mayor. Some would think na ginawa mo lang stepping stone lang yan. But nevertheless, Risa may not still clear enough hurdle or not make enough people rally behind her to be a presidentiable, so she may be forced to settle for vice presidency. And in that situation, then the question would be, sino maging kasama niya for the presidency? Will someone like Rafi Tulfo, again, I know I'm gonna, throw some, let's have some fireworks here. Will someone like Rafi Tulfo, obviously has his own macho and some would say populist and even some would say even more negative things about him, but who also happens to, someone who cares about someone who attends the International Labor Organization meetings, someone who has quite a track record of making sure he cares about the masses and people, who has some sort of a left populist touch also to him, right? Is that a matchup that she can support or can get people to rally around, right? So, mahalaga yan. But I think the basic thing that we have to keep in mind is that Risa understands the long game. Risa understands what is her challenge. And so far, ang focus na is to make sure na dun sa tatlong natatakbo sa Senado, they get all the support that they can. Also, as we discussed dun sa previous episode, Risa Ontiveros was also very clear about this thing. No, na there'll be no alliances with the Marcoses. And I think it's very intelligent and very morally correct of her to make that statement, because you cannot say you're a progressive and then you are part of a formal coalition with an administration under a president who has not yet come clean, right, on the Marcos dictatorship legacy, among many other things that we can discuss. So I think a formal coalition, a big no. And also, tactically, it's a big no. For a moment, let's play realpolitik. Let's be quote-unquote good Machiavellian about this. The moment na ang genuine opposition, meaning Risa's team of Chel and Bam and, the rest, and Franz Castro is also running for Senate. Let's say, nagsama tong left and liberals, and then nag-grand coalition sila with the admin. Of course, it brings some advantages like resources among others, but you're still fighting against 14, 15, 20 other people. There's no assurance that even with more resources from the administration, that will necessarily bump up your numbers. But it could actually even depress support from Pink Movement. And a lot of folks in the opposition who are never Marcos, before never Duterte. So I agree with Senator Trillanes that perhaps the priority right now should be make sure na hindi makabalik ang mga Dutertes. I completely understand that. But I think a kind of an outright formal coalition is also a non-starter. It's also a non-starter in the long run, because if magsama ang opposition, genuine opposition with the administration, it will be very hard for them in 2028 to present themselves as the ultimate alternative to both Marcoses and Dutertes. Because if you're Risa, that should be your game plan. Do just good enough now for 2025, build enough foundations, and by 2028, you're now the alternative. Oh, eto na. Oh, 6 years to go, 6 years Marcos. Oh, happy na kayo? Makaning presyo ng bigas? 20 pesos na ba? Or 40? Or actually doble, di ba? Digong, sabi niya, 6 months lang, tapusin niyang krimen. Oh, kamusta naman? Ano nangyari? Mas maganda bang buhay niyo? Di ba? But you won't have any of that if you are part of the administration. Because by that time, atakin ka na ng mga Dutertes for everything that went wrong under the current administration. At the same time, what is your moral ascendancy, considering, the Marcos legacy, among other things, right? So, the question though right now is the way forward then, if not a formal coalition, some would call it modus vivendi, meaning informal understanding na ang dapat mas titirahin ng genuine opposition ay mga Dutertes kaysa Marcoses. So, obviously, question yung Marcos administration and inflation management, etc. Pero ang mas attack style mo is on the Dutertes. ICC, human rights, etc. Let's say, for instance, Leila de Lima also runs for Senate. You can imagine Leila attacking more Dutertes than the Marcoses. And of course, for understandable reason, right? Could there be a modus vivendi along those lines, or informal understanding? I think even informal understanding would be perhaps a dirty word nowadays, considering the amount of never Marcos people, and then of course you can also make a moral argument against it. That's why my suggestion was a de facto modus vivendi, meaning there's not even an informal understanding. There's just a recognition of the fact, right, that first of all, the Dutertes are the number one threat to our constitutional democracy. And BBM, for all of his faults, right, is a secondary threat at this point in time. Now, that doesn't mean na kalimutan natin ginawa ng mga Marcoses. That doesn't mean but it's sequencing, right? Sequential yun eh. So in 2028, run against Marcos' preferred candidate, but in 2025, ang focus dapat is on Duterte's, right? Or, at the very least, look at the more immediate mass crimes that happen in the country. It's during Digong's time, and actually numerically more cases of extrajudicial killings during Duterte than the Marcos Senior period, right? You're talking about an ICC case that is coming in, so there has to be an immediate reaction to that. Remember, think about it this way: if ICC were to release warrants of arrest in the next 2 or 3 months, let's say, for the sake of argument, and then yung argument mo is Marcos crimes 40, 50 years ago, in effect, you're helping actually the Duterte case. Because that's exactly what the Duterte side will say. Like, sino ba kayo na arestuin kami? Kayo nga, ganun, di ba? Mag-whataboutism na yan eh. Di ba? So, that's why I don't think there's even a need for a modus vivendi. I think there should be just a recognition of the political reality that as far as threats to constitutional democracies are concerned, BBM is one notch lower, at least, than the other side. Ganyan kasimple lang, di ba? And then you operate accordingly. So this is essentially my understanding of the lay of the land. And if you want to understand some of my thinking, please feel free to check also my latest columns sa Philippine Daily Inquirer, A Grand Coalition Against the Dutertes, 2025, right? And then it's a question mark. The reason I'm saying all of these things is because I mentioned the term Grand Coalition. You can look at my vlogs 6, 7, 8 months ago. I was already talking about this issue. Then Trillanes came on this show, and then we openly discussed this. And I think one reason also Sonny Trillanes felt comfortable with me is because probably he also saw some of this stuff. But if we were to put aside the kind of a Machiavellian logic, and actually if you just look at reality as it is, there's even no need for a Grand Coalition or a modus vivendi. I think it's pretty much understood that the number one threat to constitutional democracy in the Philippines are the Dutertes. Just proceed accordingly. Not to mention, the power of genuine opposition is that they cannot make a genuine criticism of Dutertes. It will be harder for Marcos to do that because Marcos is still, last time I checked, insisting na intact pa rin ang unit team. Diba? Kasama sila sa isang coalition na at least malinis ang kamay ang mga genuine opposition on that issue. They did not enable the entry of Dutertes or re-entry of Dutertes in the power. So with all of those things in mind, ito po yung lay of the land. I think this is the big picture and these are the dynamics that we have to look at heading into 2025 elections. So, to wrap it up, yes, I do believe that this is going to be the most consequential midterm elections. But I think it should be also a stepping stone for the opposition. That 2025 should be, ito yung dapat oportunidad nila na mamarkaan sila in a good way. Ito yung oportunidad nila to regain their, essentially, get their act together, their bearings. Ito rin yung oportunidad for them to be a little bit experimental and also get a sense of people. Ano mga gusto ng taong bayan, pulso ng bayan. Ito rin ang oportunidad nila para mag-repent. Honestly, I think the opposition should go around and say, nagkakulang kami. Tama po kayo. Naintindihan namin kayo. Bakit di kami nanalo? Dahil gusto nyo, mas magaling na gobyerno, mas structural reforms, mas, tunay na pagbabago. They should do that. They should say that. I think this is the chance for the post-mortem, for the repentance politics that we never saw from the opposition all these years. Hate me all you want, but deep inside I was always right on that issue. In no other democracy in the world did we see the revival of progressive opposition, and even the liberals, until there was a reckoning, there was a repentance, and there was a recognition of their shortcomings. So para sa akin, 2025 should be a moment of redemption, repentance, and recognition of their mistakes. And then from there, work it for 2028. That will be your chance to really come back stronger than ever. We saw, as I said, again, not one-to-one correspondence, not exactly the same cases, but the opposition in India also looked completely helpless and hapless not long ago. But after 2 terms of Modi, medyo napagod din ang mga tao. Especially yung mga ordinaryong tao na hindi naka-benefit dun sa lahat ng mga big talks ni Modi about great India, India rising power, high-tech India. Hundreds of millions of people in India in the rural areas did not benefit from whatever growth was generated during the Modi era. And for all of that muscle flexing and chest thumping on the global stage, marami sa mga ordinaryong mga mamamayan ng India ay hindi naka-benefit doon. So that provided an opening for the most konyotic elite, like Marohas squared, right? Of India, Rahul Gandhi. I mean, Rahul Gandhi is more conyotic than me by Indian standards. I mean, the guy is half Italian, for heaven's sake, right? Cambridge graduate, right? I mean, ano ang laban niya kay Modi, diba? On the surface. And yet, he doubled the seats. And now he's a de facto leader of opposition. And now, he is the front runner to succeed Modi. From complete loser, from zero to hero. So time was that element of time. After 2 election losses, Congress Party came out strong. My sense is by 2028, mas handa ang taong bayan for an alternative politics. But before we go there, they have to come clean. They have to come clean. At dapat talaga, instead of all of this voter blaming and elitism and nonsense, dapat talaga sabihin nila sa taong bayan, opo, naintindihan namin kayo. Napagod na kayo. Ilang dekada na pinangako namin na magkakaroon ng tunay ng pagbabago, ganito, ganyan, walang nangyari masyado. Yun naman ang katotohanan eh. Diba? Look at the condition of our farmers. Yung ating mga kababayan na masa. Significantly ba na-improve nung panahon ni Ramos or Aquino? Hindi. Hindi actually masyado eh. You could even make an argument na during Ramos, humina pa yung agriculture sector natin because of trade liberalization and all of that. I'm saying it as someone who actually likes Ramos and thinks he's the best president we have had. Albeit, the bar is very low. Pinoy, for everything that he didn't create structural transformation. And infrastructural transformation also did not happen much. Although, I understand the fiscal consolidation argument there. Nevertheless, para sa akin, real change comes from within. Right? And this applies in politics too. Hindi magko-consider ng alternative ang mga tao sa 2028 if the people who came before this whole Duterte Marcos axis whatever also do not recognize openly and sincerely yung kanilang shortcomings. I think that's where real transformation will change. I know Risa is a bit more politically diplomatic than me, right? After all, she's in office, I'm not in office, so I have this luxury to say this openly. But I know deep inside, Risa also knows what I'm saying here, right? And I hope she will do what is right sa darating na elections. This is not about pleasing some titas and titas of Manila. This is not about making sure na hindi ma-hurt ang feelings ni ganito or ganyan. No, this is about fighting for the soul of Philippine democracy. The stakes are just too high for us to be just too nice and plastikan and all of that. We have to come to terms with the failures of the past. Duterte was not trouble in paradise. We were never a paradise because we never really had a genuine democracy. But we should fight for the genuine democracy at yun po yung dapat direction natin sa darating na halalan. 2025, but more importantly, 2028 po. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much again sa lahat ng mga nakinig sa atin. Maraming salamat. Ayan, may mga isa-dalawang troll pa rin. Hindi ko na pinansin. Masyado ng seryoso itong discussion. Sorry guys, pag medyo nandun na ako sa mood na talker, wala na akong pake. Kahit mag-gera kayo sa harap ko, when I'm in the zone, my friend. Forget about it. You're not gonna distract me, okay? You had 6 years. Forget about it. Okay. Thank you very much, guys. Maraming salamat. And tuloy-tuloy lang natin itong bardagulan na ito. But I hope you see where I'm coming from, right? You see, everything I said here, no notes, no script, nothing. This is completely spontaneous because matagal ko inisip yun. Matagal ko nararamdaman itong issue na ito at yung talagang pangangailangan natin sa ating politika eh. We really need that. So please, let's just stop this nonsense, voter blaming, elitism, pa-cute and all of that. No more time for that. Let's get serious. Alright? Let's get serious. Yun pong kailangan natin. God bless po. Maraming salamat and please, continue to support us. Maliit lang bagay na siguro naman yan na medyo mag-like lang naman kayo dito, medyo mag-subscribe lang naman kayo dyan para tuloy-tuloy ang pag-spread na itong mensahe natin. And thank you also dun sa mga nakikinig sa atin from all around the world. I know some are more vocal perhaps about listening to me than others. But sana tuloy-tuloy lang yan. Alright? On that note, thank you very much and please stop comparing me to Chris Chappell or Tristan Tate, mga ganun, okay? I am myself, okay? I am myself and we'll proceed from there. Salamat po. God bless.